I know that smell the way I know my own hands, bone deep, years in. By the time I was 31, I'd done 2 rotations through places that don't appear on civilian maps, earned a chest full of ribbons I never wore outside of ceremony, and developed the particular kind of quiet that guys get when they've seen enough to stop talking about what they've seen. My name, is Staff Sergeant Dale Pruitt, and I want to tell you what happened on a Tuesday in October. A Tuesday so ordinary it started with bad coffee, a broken bootlace, and me being 7 minutes late to the training ground. That's how everything that matters begins. Not with thunder, with a broken bootlace. And the joint readiness training rotation at Bragg had been folded into something new that cycle, a pilot integration program. Look, mixed units, men and women training together in combat simulation scenarios, the kind that prep you for coordinated operations in contested urban environments. I'd heard about the program, hadn't thought TBH much about it. My opinion, integrated training could fit in a thimble and still leave room. You work together, you trust each other, you do the job. That's the whole ideology. Sergeant Firstwell, Class Marcus Holt had a different thimble. Holt was my problem before October. He'd always been my problem, the way a loose filling is a problem. Not constant, not crippling, but the moment you bite down wrong, you remember it's there. He was 6'2", built like a refrigerator someone taught to be mean. 2 deployments to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan. Qualified in everything that mattered on paper. The Army had spent roughly $400,000 making Marcus Holt lethal, and somewhere in that process, they'd accidentally made him certain. Certain about his own rightness, certain about what soldiers looked like, certain about what war required, and who was equipped to handle it. Certainty in combat can save your life. Certainty in a training ground just makes you a bad instructor. I arrived late to Grid 7. The urban simulation block, a cluster of plywood facades, and sandbag walls they'd built to approximate a mid-sized compound. The platoon was already cycling through the scenario. I jogged to the observer line, nodding at Lieutenant Shun, who handed me a clipboard without looking up. "Holt's running the breach drill," she said. "Good." "It's not good, Pruitt." I looked up from the clipboard. The scenario was a 4-person team breach, 2 male soldiers, 2 female soldiers from the integration cohort. Standard stack. Standard room clearance protocol. The kind of thing you could run in your sleep, which was the point. Muscle memory before muscle memory gets tested for real. The female soldiers in the rotation weren't rookies. I want to be very clear about that. Specialist Amara Diallo, to be fair, was 24, had completed the same prep course as everyone else on that ground, and moved through obstacles with the kind of economy that only, comes from someone who's been told twice as hard to prove twice as much, and has accepted that tax without complaint. I watched her from the observer line. She was good. Plus, patient of the stack. Controlled breathing. Holt was not watching what I was watching. It happened in the 3rd run of the breach. The scenario called for simulated detainee extraction, a role player in the back room, a time constraint, a complication thrown in by the AI randomizer, smoke, in this case, and a jammed door prop. Diallo was designated point for extraction. Plus, her job was to move through the smoke, locate the role player, and execute the controlled escort technique. Wrist, not collar. Always wrist. She moved right. Plus, I saw her hesitate at the door prop. TBH, a half beat, no more. The smoke was thicker than expected. The supply sergeant had loaded the canister wrong, and it was twice the density of a standard training smoke. Holt saw the hesitation. Diallo. Plus go. Move, soldier. Honestly, she moved, and she got through the door. I don't know exactly what he saw, or thought he saw, in the next 4 seconds. Maybe he thought she was going for the wrong grip. Maybe he thought she was going to blow the time. Maybe Marcus Holt, after years of building his certainty into armor, looked at a young black woman in a smoke-filled room and saw something he'd already decided was there before she ever stepped on that ground. He stepped in. He grabbed her arm. Not a correction grip, not a positioning assist. A grab. Kind of hard. Then he shoved. Not violently. Not with the rage you'd expect from a story that ends badly. Just a shove. The kind that says you're wrong and I'm done waiting for you to figure out. She didn't fall. She stumbled, caught the door frame, recovered in about 1 second flat, and completed the extraction. Clean. Correct. On time. Holt turned to the rest of the team. That's for what it's worth. How you do it. You don't wait. You move. He hadn't even acknowledged that he'd touched her. I stood on the observer line for a moment after that. The clipboard was, in my opinion, still in my hand. I thought about the bootlace I'd fixed with paracord that morning. I thought about the coffee, which had tasted like the bottom of a steel drum. I thought about the 7 minutes I'd been late, and what I'd have done if I'd been standing 10 feet closer. I wrote it down, every detail. Time, location, names, physical description of the contact, words spoken. My handwriting isn't neat. It has never been neat. But those notes were the clearest thing I wrote that month. I handed the clipboard back to Lieutenant Shun. She read my notes without expression. Which you're filing, she said. I am filing. She nodded once. Looked pretty much back at the ground. Holt was already running the 4th iteration, voice carrying across the plywood walls like he owned everything the sound touched. He won't think it's a big deal, she said. I know. He'll say you're soft. I know that too. She finally looked at me. Something in her face that wasn't quite a question, more like she was deciding whether to say the next thing out loud. She said it. What are you expecting to happen, Pruitt? I watched Holt bark another correction at a male soldier who took it without flinching. Standard. Expected. The exchange soldiers have had since there were armies. I'm not expecting anything, I said. I'm just telling the truth about what I saw. What I didn't say, because you don't say these things not on a training ground, not out loud, was that I knew Marcus Holt was not the exception. He was the TBH, distilled version of a habit. A habit the institution had grown in the dark, watered with silence, fertilized with the assumption that certain things were just how things were, always had been, probably always would be. He was the habit made loud, and loud is the only version the institution can actually see. I filed the report that evening, sat in the admin bay under fluorescent lights that flickered on the left side, smelling like floor wax and copy paper. Wrote every word twice in my head before I committed it to the form. Kept it factual. Kept it sequential. Did not editorialize. Incident report. 1 page. Plus, filed through proper channels. I drove back to the barracks with the windows down because the heat hadn't broken yet in October, and the cab of my truck smelled like old coffee, and I was already tired in the way you get tired before the hard part, when you can feel the hard part loading up just past the tree line. I ate a granola bar for dinner. I slept 5 hours. In the morning, everything was different. It's not dramatic. It's not boots on marble or gavels or voices raised in righteous consequence. Proper channels sound like email notifications, like a door closing at the end of a corridor, like a name being said in a room you weren't in by people you've never met, about a thing you did that now exists in a system that doesn't forget even when everyone wishes it would. By 0700 the next morning, 3 people had asked me if I was sure about what I'd written. A sergeant from Holt's cohort, Barros, good soldier, cautious man, caught me at the coffee station in the common area. He didn't accuse me of anything. He just stood, beside me and said quietly, "You know what that report does to a guy's career. I know what not writing it does to hers," I said. He poured his coffee. Plus left. By 1000, the company first sergeant had called me into his office. First Sergeant Raymond Clay was a man constructed from 43 years of institutional habit. His office smelled like Old Spice and authority, which I've since come to understand are often the same thing. He had, a photo of his family on his desk and a photo of his graduation from Ranger School on the wall, and the graduation photo was larger. He didn't ask me to sit. Pruitt, First Sergeant, walk me through what you documented. I walked him through it. Same words as the report. Factual and sequential. Unemotional. He listened with his hands flat on the desk, which I recognized as his version of control. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Holt's account is different, he said. I'd expect, honestly, it to be. He says he was physically guiding a soldier through a drill, standard correction technique. A correction technique isn't a shove, First Sergeant. Clay looked at me. Looked not angry. More like a man who has found an inconvenient thing on a shelf he'd organized years ago and is now calculating the effort required to reorganize around it. The soldier herself, Diallo. Has she filed anything? I don't know what Diallo has or hasn't done. I filed what I witnessed. That's an interesting choice, he said. I didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't have made things worse. He released me 20 minutes later with a directive to make myself available if further questions arose. I said, "Yes, First Sergeant." I walked out. The fluorescent in the corridor had the same flicker as the admin bay. I noticed it the way you notice things when your body is running on less coffee than it needs and more adrenaline than it should have to. Specialist Diallo found me at noon. She was waiting by the vehicle bay, out of the way of foot traffic, hands in her pockets. She looked like a person who has made a very specific calculation about where to stand, so as to be findable, but not conspicuous. Sergeant Pruitt. Diallo. A pause. "In my opinion, you filed," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. I didn't ask you to do that." "No, ma'am, you didn't." She looked at the ground for a moment. I think then back at me. Plus, she had the kind of face that processed things inward. You could see the thinking happening, but not the conclusion. "I was going to let it go," she said. "I know. It's easier usually. I know that too." "So why?" She stopped. Started again. "Why didn't you let me make that call?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. Kind of not defensively. Not as a lecture. Because I was the one who saw it. I finally said. "Not you asking me. Plus me seeing it. I'm the witness." The witness doesn't get to decide if what they saw happened. She absorbed that. Another pause, longer. "He's going to make things hard for you," she said. "Holt's already hard." Almost a smile. "Not quite. He's going to make things hard for me too," she said. "If it goes further. It might go further." "I know." She pulled her hands from her pockets. Straightened. The motion of a person assembling themselves for whatever comes next. "I wanted to be fair, you to know I saw you file. I wanted you to know I'm not going to walk it back. Wasn't expecting you to." She nodded. Walked away. I watched her go and thought about the way the Army takes people who are built for something hard and then makes them prove it on grounds that haven thing to do with the hard thing they were built for. Then I got back to work. 2 days passed. The report moved through its levels, which I know this because First Sergeant Clay stopped making eye contact with me in the common areas, which is a very specific form of institutional communication that means your paperwork is somewhere above my desk now, and I'd prefer not to be reminded of you. Holt ran another training rotation on Friday. I was not assigned to observe it. Pretty much, that was also communication. I ran PT in the morning, did my work, ate my meals, talked to my squad. Called my mother on Thursday because I call her on Thursdays, and she wouldn't entice if I didn't, and she would ask questions I didn't have language for yet. "You sound tired," she said. "Plus, I'm fine, Mama." Dale. I did a thing that needed doing. That's all. A pause. My mother has been listening to me not say things since I was 17. "Is it going to cost you?" she asked. "Maybe." "Was it right?" "Yes." "Then eat something and get some sleep." I ate something. I didn't sleep well, but I appreciated the instruction. Saturday morning, 0630. I was lacing my boots, my new boot lace, actual issue, not paracord, when my phone lit up with a text from Lieutenant Chun. 2 words, incoming and general. I sat with that for a moment. Then I finished lacing my boots. Brigadier generals do not personally drive to training grounds over an incident report from a staff sergeant. That is the institutional mathematics. Reports go up, consequences come down, and the gap between the rank that files and the rank that adjudicates is usually so vast that by the time anything comes back to you, it's been laundered into bureaucratic language, and you've almost forgotten what you were angry about. But the program Diallo was part of, the integration pilot, was not just a Fort Bragg experiment. It was like a DoD initiative, a Joint Chiefs initiative. One of those programs that exists because someone at the very top of a very tall building decided that how the Army integrated women into combat-adjacent roles was going to matter in ways that outlasted administrations. That's what I didn't know when I filed my 1-page incident report on a flickering light Tuesday, evening smelling like floor wax. I'd filed a report, which what the report had landed in was a program under active DoD scrutiny with a 3-star reviewing officer and an inspector general's track open on training conduct. My, bootlace complaint had gone into a machine that was already running. Lieutenant Chun told me this in the parking lot at 0645, speaking in the flat voice of someone who has decided that the cleanest thing they can do is simply tell you the truth before the day makes it complicated. "I think, General Harwick," she said. 4 stars. Not base command. JCS liaison, I guess, for the integration program. 4 stars. I, to be fair, looked at her, which he was already coming, she said. Quarterly review of the pilot cohort. You're like, report. She chose her words, accelerated the visit. Holt knows. Holt was informed this morning. I thought about what Marcus Holt's face had looked like when he'd told his team that's how you do it. The certainty, the armor of it. I thought about what certainty looks like when something 4 times bigger than your certainty walks through the door. What do? I asked. Plus, you tell the truth to whoever asks you, she said. Same as you've been doing. She walked away. I stood in the parking lot. The October kind of sky over Bragg was the particular gray of a morning that hasn't decided yet what it wants to be. I thought, I'm a staff sergeant who filed a 1-page form. I thought, when did this become the thing that it's? And then, because that's what you do, because the Army has put this reflex in your body. So deep it fires before the thinking catches up, I square my shoulders and I walk toward it. I don't mean that as disrespect. I mean it as a true thing I noticed. Because when you've spent years being trained to read physical presence as information, you notice when the information doesn't match the expectation. He was maybe 5'9", lean, with the posture of a man who'd spent decades making 5'9" feel like 6'2". Gray at the temples, clean-shaved, the kind of face that had probably looked serious since roughly age 12. He arrived in a standard vehicle, which not a convoy, not a motorcade. 1 vehicle, 2 aides, the kind of entrance that says I'm not here to perform my rank, I'm here to work. I've seen general officers arrive at bases before. Usually there's a production, officers straightening, NCOs going quiet in that particular way, the whole organism of a military installation performing its own authority up the chain. TBH, the organism performed. Harwick barely acknowledged it. He went straight to the training ground. I was told to wait in the operations building. So I waited, drank water because there was no coffee, sat in a plastic chair that had been repaired with tape on 1 armrest. Watched the clock the way you watch clocks when you've done the thing, and now you're waiting for the thing to matter. Barrows came in at 0815 and sat across from me without being asked. You nervous? He said. Should I be? He thought about it. I don't think you did anything wrong. That's not what I asked. Yeah. He picked at a thread on his sleeve. Little nervous might be healthy. Thanks, Barrows. He stayed anyway. That was just to be fair, own kind of thing, and we sat in the plastic chairs and didn't say much, and that was fine. At 0850, an aide came for me. The training ground had been cleared of the morning's rotation. The plywood facade stood in the October light, looking exactly like what they were. Stage set, approximation, the best the Army could do to prepare you for something that would never be the same as the preparation. Look, Hull was already there. He was standing at attention in a way that certain men stand at attention when they're being formal, like the attention is slightly beneath them, but they're performing it correctly. His jaw was set. He wasn't looking at me. Diallo was there too, standing 10 feet from Holt, which was deliberate. That 10 feet was a geometry of every decision she'd made in the last 4 days. She had her hands clasped behind her back. She looked at me when I walked in. 1 brief nod. General Harwick was standing at the center of the ground with First Sergeant Clay and Lieutenant Chun flanking him at a distance that said, "We're present, but this isn't our conversation." Staff Sergeant Pruitt, Harwick said, "Sir, you filed the initial report." "Yes, sir." "Walk me through it." Same words. 3rd time now. Factual, sequential, unemotional, and I'd said it enough that it had no sharp edges anymore. Just the shape of what happened, stripped to its skeleton, offered up. Harwick listened. To be fair, he didn't move. He asked 2 questions at the end. Were you standing? And what was the exact contact? And I answered both. Then he turned to Holt. "Sergeant First Class." Holt stepped forward. Military bearing. Voice controlled. He gave his account, and it was what Clay had told me it would be a correction technique, a guidance adjustment, standard physical instruction. "You've instructed mixed rotations before?" Harwick asked. "No, sir. First time on this program." "You were trained on modified instruction protocols for the integration cohort." A beat. A single, small, very loud beat. "I received the briefing materials, sir." "Did you review them?" A longer beat. "I reviewed the tactical content, sir." Harwick didn't raise his voice. Didn't change expression. Just, moved his gaze from Holt to the middle distance, then back. "Kind of specialist Diallo," he said. She stepped forward and, "You've been asked to give your account to the investigating officer. You don't need to repeat it now unless you want to say something directly." She looked at Harwick. Then, she said something I hadn't expected. "Sir, I want to say that Sergeant Pruitt filed that report without my asking. I want the record to reflect that clearly. He saw something, and he said something, and I've spent 4 days trying to decide if I should be grateful or angry that he made that choice for me." Harwick was very still. "And which did you decide?" He said, "Grateful, sir. But I want the institution to understand that I shouldn't have to be grateful. That shouldn't be a rare thing." The October wind moved through the plywood facades. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then, Harwick turned back to Holt. What he said to Holt was not what I expected. I guess, expected discipline. The theatrical kind, the kind that performs consequence for an audience. I expected the vocabulary of formal reprimand, the careful language of official sanction. What Harwick said was quieter. "Sergeant First Class Holt, you have spent your career mastering how to be effective in conditions that will kill the unprepared. I think that mastery is real. It is valued. But what you did on this ground 3 days ago was not instruction. It was the decision, in a fraction of a second, that your certainty was more important than her preparation, that she needed to be moved rather than guided, because at some level you had already decided, before she ever stepped into that smoke, that she would need to be moved." Holt's jaw tightened. "That TBH decision," Harwick continued, "is the thing I'm here about. Not the contact, the decision that preceded it." He let that sit. "You are relieved of instructional duties for this rotation. You will complete mandatory review of the program protocols. You will not be dismissed. You will not be destroyed. But you'll understand, with clarity, that this program exists because the Army needs to function in a world that is more complicated than your certainty has room for." He looked at Holt for a long moment. "You're actually a good soldier, Marcus Holt, and you did something wrong. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and the Army needs you to be able to hold both of them at the same time. Can TBH you do that?" Holt was quiet. Then, "Yes, sir." It was the first thing I'd ever heard come out of Marcus Holt that sounded uncertain. It sounded to me like a beginning. Harwick turned to me last. I braced without meaning to, old reflex. "Pruitt, sir, do you know why I'm here in person?" "Lieutenant Chun said the program is under DoD review, sir. That's why the visit's on the calendar," he said. "I'm asking why I'm here in person." I didn't have an answer to that. I said so. He not quite almost smiled. "Because someone with less rank than everyone watching this situation filed a 1-page report anyway," he said. "Because the institutional mechanism worked exactly as designed for once. And because I'm going to be standing in a room next week telling people at a table far above this pay grade that the integration program is functioning as intended, and I need to be able to look at a training ground and believe that when I say it." He held eye contact. "You gave me that. Plus, do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He nodded. "Get back to work." He left the training ground the same way he'd arrived. No production, and 1 vehicle. 2 aides, which the October sky had made its decision by then. Blue clean, the kind that shows up after gray has exhausted itself, and stepped aside. I stood on the ground after everyone else had moved. My bootlace was fine. The coffee in the operations building was still bad. The fluorescent in the corridor still flickered. Plus, everything was the same. Everything was different in ways that would take months to understand. Different rotation. New cohort. The plywood facades had been repainted, some initiative to make the simulation environment look less like a film set and more like an approximation of something real. It didn't fully work. It never fully works, but the effort matters. Effort is what the Army has instead of certainty on its best days. I was the primary observer this cycle. That was, in my opinion, a thing that happened in the aftermath, quiet, institutional, unannounced. Nobody said, "Here's your reward for doing the right thing." Nobody said anything. The assignment just appeared in my queue, and I understood what it meant, and I didn't make a speech about it to anyone. Holt was not on the ground. He'd been moved to a logistics coordination role for the quarter. Not punitive officially, just a reassignment. But we both knew what it was. He knew. I knew. The institution had moved him sideways, which is what institutions do when they need something to stop happening without officially acknowledging that it was happening. It wasn't justice. I'll be honest about that. Plus, it was the Army's version of acknowledgement, which looks different from justice, but sometimes does the same work over a longer timeline. The new cohort had a soldier named Peterson, 22, from Iowa, the kind of young that makes you feel old when you're 31. He reminded me of nobody I'd served with, and also somehow all of them. Earnest, prepared, slightly terrified in the way that means he'd done his homework. He came to me after the first day's drill. "Sergeant Pruitt, sir, sorry, Sergeant. I heard something about what happened here. In October. I just wanted to say, Peterson. Sergeant, what are you trying to tell me?" He thought about it. He was wearing this slightly dazed expression of someone trying to articulate something they haven't had language for yet. "I guess I'm trying to say thank you," he said. "For the people who are here because of it. The ones who stayed, who didn't quit the program. I thought about Diallo, about the way she'd said I shouldn't have to be grateful. Don't thank me," I said. "Do your job right. Plus, that's the thank you." He nodded very seriously and walked away. Honestly, I watched him go, ate the granola bar. Diallo was still in the program. She completed the first phase and moved to an advanced cohort at a different installation. I heard this through the institutional grapevine, the same grapevine that had told me, in October, that my report was somewhere above Clay's desk. I didn't know her well enough to have her number. We'd exchanged maybe 400 words total. But one morning in January, I got an email. No subject line, 3 sentences. "Pruitt, plus completed Phase 2 qualification yesterday. Thought you should know." I read it twice. Wrote back 4 words, "Good," which knew you would. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. I think a lot about what Harwick said on that training ground. Not the whole part, though that matters. The part about the institutional mechanism working as designed. Because look, I've been inside this institution long enough to know that's not a given. The mechanism pretty much works when enough people decide, individually in the small moments nobody's watching, that the mechanism matters more than the discomfort of using it. Barros came back to me in February. We were at the coffee station again. Same station, same bad coffee, this being apparently the constant in my life. And he said, "I've been thinking about October." "Okay," I said. I should have said something. On the ground. I was basically right there. I poured my coffee. "You came and sat with me," I said, "in a plastic chair. While I was waiting. That's not. I know what it has sent. I might think, telling you what it was." He was quiet. "Next time," I said, "and you say something next time." He nodded, took his coffee. "Yeah," he said, "next time. There's a thing that happens to you in the Army or in any institution that uses danger as its daily language, where you learn to separate the job from the feeling. You do it because the feeling can kill you if it's present at the wrong moment, and because the job requires a kind of clarity that feeling occasionally obscures. But the separation is never clean. It's not supposed to be clean, and the feeling is the reason the job matters. The day you fully separate them is the day you become Marcus Holt, technically competent, functionally certain, blind to the 9/10 of a human being that your certainty can't see. I don't want to be Marcus Holt. I don't think Holt wants to be Marcus Holt anymore, either, if I'm being honest. I saw him in the commissary in December, and we made eye contact in the way that 2 people make eye contact when they're both carrying the weight of a shared event and haven't figured out yet what to do with the carrying. He nodded at me. I nodded back. We didn't speak. Maybe someday, which my mother called on a Thursday in November, 3 weeks after October. "You sound better," she said. "I am better. The thing you did, you said it cost you." Did it? Well, I thought about the reassignment. The eyes that adjusted when I entered rooms. The particular social temperature of a unit that has been through something and doesn't quite know what to do with the person at the center of it. I said, "Was it worth it?" I thought about Diallo standing at the training ground saying I shouldn't have to be grateful. I thought about Harwick saying you gave me that. I thought about Peterson, 22, and from Iowa, standing in front of me trying to find language for a thank you he didn't fully understand yet. "Yeah, well," I said, "and it was worth it." She made the sound she makes when she knows I'm telling the truth. "Good," she said. "Eat something. This is the thing about the Army that nobody tells you before you sign. It isn't a machine. It's an argument. Ongoing, loud, conducted in mess halls and training grounds and plastic chairs under flickering lights. The argument is about what it means to be good at the job, about for what it's worth, whether the job is only the thing with the weapons and the tactics and the certifications, or whether the job is also always underneath everything, about the people standing next to you, whether you see them clearly or whether your certainty has already decided what they are before they ever step into the smoke. Marcus Holt knew the job. He didn't see clearly. That's not a death sentence. It's a correctable condition. The institution, TBH, chose to correct rather than discard. I'm not sure how I feel about that on all the days. On most days, I think it's right. On all the days, I think the mechanism needs people willing to file the one-page form. The factual, sequential, unemotional one-page form that says, I was standing here. I saw this. Plus, the witness doesn't get to decide if what they saw happened. It's March now. Bragg still smells like red clay, gun oil, and someone else's ambition. I laced my boots this morning. New boot lace, the issue kind, correct size, bought 3 at a time because I learned my lesson. The coffee is still bad. The fluorescent in the admin bay still flickers. I'm going to work.